Christians or religious people, religion is trying to find out how the universe began, and so is science. They're not.
No, religion says it does know, excuse me.
No, it's trying
Religion is
to
not
find
a process of scientific inquiry. Religion is an affirmation of faith. It
I
says
am
it
a
already
religious
knows.
person.
Let's end with a couple of quick questions. If, as Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens wrote, religion is ineradicable, and as you put it, harder to get rid of than smallpox, doesn't this basically mean that whatever motivations you have, no matter how passionately you're driven and love for the truth, you are essentially wasting your time?
I would never admit to wasting my time trying to propagate the truth, and I think I can claim a modicum of success with the people that I've read my books, the people who've attended my lectures. It's a doctrine of despair to say that we're stuck with religion for all eternity. The religions of ancient Greece and ancient Rome and the Vikings have all dead. Nobody believes in Jupiter or Thor anymore. And I have great hopes that the same is going to be true of the God of Abraham.
Sometimes people say, how can you attack religion when you consider the comfort it gives to somebody old and alone and afraid? And I say, how much better it would be if we, the neighbors of such a person, could give that person love. Thank you very much. But what I'd like to focus on now, just in concluding, is what I called contemporary humanism, or secular humanism as we understand it today. That is, thinking about the construction of a society which is very friendly to, very encouraging to, the development of good and flourishing individual lives, at the heart of which would be good relationships with people you care about and with your fellows in society, and which gives to individuals a margin, a space in which they can develop themselves according to their gifts for living good lives. It's a tremendously important point, this one, well recognized in the Enlightenment, for example, so central to the Enlightenment argument, that society should be in principle pluralistic, and it's wrong to expect people to conform with one another and with some one ideal imposed on them top down. And this, of course, is the model of the great religions. There's one great truth. Everybody has to sign up for it. Everybody's got to obey on pain of punishment. And this monolithic structure of the great religions is precisely the monolithic structure of Stalinism or Nazism. There's one great truth and everybody's got to obey on pain of punishment. It's the same thing. It's no surprise to me that Joseph Stalin was bred up in a seminary and that Adolf Hitler was a Catholic. I mean, they must have learned something from those experiences and applied them. And you get this canard that, the totalitarianisms of the 20th century were products of the Enlightenment. No, they are wonderful examples of the counter-Enlightenment, just as the negative aspects of Romanticism, which privileges the tribe, the blood of the people, your ethnicity, or the importance of emotion and sentiment over reason, and so on.
But raising the sights just a fraction, I'd say that to me that what matters most is the pursuit of happiness, in the words of our greatest founding father, and the pursuit of liberty, freedom, and that these things are incompatible, completely incompatible with the worship of an unalterable celestial dictator, someone who can watch you while you sleep and convict you of thought crime, and whose rule cannot be challenged, and who's the big brother whose eternal reign may not be disputed. That makes the concept of the pursuit of freedom and happiness completely negative, negates it. One of the things I live for is to return a stout and joyful non-serviam to this dictator, who I'm pleased to find doesn't really exist, but is instead a creation of those who want to install a theocracy in the real life where I can participate, and I'm not going to give them an inch. The second thing I live for is, if not exactly passing on my genes, taking part in activities that might allow those genes to be passed on. And not scorning the three delightful children who result, who are everything to me and who are my only chance of even a glimpse of a second life, let alone an immortal one. And I'll tell you something, if I was told to sacrifice them to prove my devotion to God, if I was told to do what all monotheists are told to do, and admire the man who said, yes, I'll gut my kid to show my love of God, I'd say, no, fuck you.
Well, what's important about this for us now is the point is very often made that it is the religions that offer emotional satisfaction or spirituality or an experience of the transcendent. And you go into a great cathedral and the organ is playing and there's incense and you can be captured by psychologically by this atmosphere and feel that you've stepped to a place apart from the ordinary demands of life. Sunday became just such a place. If you went to church, it was a place apart from the rigors and exigencies of daily life, and that this was a refreshment to the soul. And that's why very often you see outside churches the phrase from the Bible, "Come unto me, all ye who are burdened, heavy laden, and I will refresh you." This idea of the refreshment offered by the spiritual. And this is a fantastic achievement on the part of the religions to have absorbed and monopolized the idea of the spiritual, the idea of refreshment. I mean the word spiritual in an entirely secular way, to do with our complicated emotions and our emotional responses and our emotional needs, and the way that they can sometimes connect with our intellects, which is why sometimes you can enjoy, if you're a mathematician, the beauty of a proof, or why you can look at a painting and marvel at the technical skill as well as the story told by it, or as well as the striking character of the painting aesthetically, visually.
I'm very keen to know how it is that you, in a sense, that you dare to say that without a belief in religion, I would have no source for ethical or moral.
It's not what I'm
beliefs.
saying.
You seem to hint at it.
No.
Did he not?
No, oh, I'm not saying you don't know morality, Christopher. I'm saying you can't justify morality without a being beyond yourself.
So that, just if I, okay, good. So that if I say that for me it's enough to be willing to love my fellow man and perhaps hope that my fellow man and woman will give me some of the same consideration in return, and that after all, the Samaritan, of whom we've all heard, was the only one to help after the priests and the Levites had passed by. And the Samaritan also, though he's talked of by Jesus, can't have been a Christian because he appears in a story told by Jesus, so there can't be any Christianity before that. Somehow, he knew the moral thing to do is to help his fellow person without a religious instruction.
Yes, that's
and that's actually the whole point of the parable, though it's not the way it's usually told.
Let me interject here and just ask the question another way. Do you
Whereas
believe...
to tell a child, you go to this church, which means you'll go to heaven, but your little playmates don't go to that church, and therefore will go to hell, seems to me to be an unpleasant thing to be saying. But
yes, that is...
Maybe I'm in a minority then.
That could be an unpleasant thing, but how do you...
Actually an evil thing to be saying.
Let's call it evil, Christopher.
And something that only a religious person would dream of saying.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion. And to answer your next question, morality comes from humanism and is stolen by religion for its own purposes.
Humanism according to who? Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, who?
You're saying that Hitler was a humanist?
Just Hitchens.
I've lived to hear it said.
Hitchens.
In Virginia. Hitler was a Catholic.
Hitler
was a Catholic, so was Mussolini.
Give me a... How does morality exist if it's just my opinion against your opinion and there's no standard beyond?
Both of them had an official political concordat with the Protestant and Catholic churches. Both of them wanted the worship of themselves as well as of God.
So I suppose no evil comes from atheism.
And their third main ally, Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, not content just to be theocratic, was himself a god. So anyone who says that fascism and Nazi secular is an ignoramus.
Why is it
on
wrong?
A gigantic scale.
All right.
With regards to religion, you've given an example where the Islamic faith and the Muslims basically, they wrap themselves up in bombs because that's what they believe is an Islamic faith. But I disagree with you because there are more than 1 billion Muslims living in the world today who actually believe in the Quran and the scripture, which you said if everybody started believing in the scripture, then that would be horrible. But I disagree with you, because more than 1 billion people, billion Muslims believe that if you kill one innocent person, it's as you've killed the entire humanity.
The problem with many scriptures, and I think the Quran is no exception, is that you can find a verse that says so-and-so, and you find another verse that says the opposite, and so you have to pick and choose. I mean, is it not the case, for example...
You always choose the bad ones.
Well, no, I mean, I'm suggesting that you shouldn't be in a position of having to choose. I mean, you shouldn't base your life on a holy book which has contradictory verses, where you can choose one verse when you want to make one point and another verse when you want to make another point. I mean, isn't it the case that the penalty for apostasy is death?
So this complex of emotional and intellectual responses to things, and our sense of connection with this world of ours, which in so many ways is an extraordinarily beautiful one, and the tenderest aspects of our relationships to other people. These are things which are part of human experience and part of the human condition. They belong to us, and therefore humanism recognizes them and embodies them in its thinking about the good, about ethics. It doesn't belong solely to religion. In fact, religion has hijacked these things. It's so hijacked them that people now don't think that a walk in the country, or listening to music, or being with friends, or just twiddling your toes and looking at the sky, aren't forms of refreshment for the spirit, in the secular sense, of human beings. But so they are. Why should it just belong to religion to be able to speak to those aspects of ourselves? Humanism is perfectly capable of alerting people to the fact that there are all sorts of different ways in which we can be nourished intellectually and emotionally as human beings without having to appeal to anything transcendent or divine. Now,
There are people who will, when a grenade is lobbed through the window, throw themselves on it before it can blow up everyone. It does happen. There are people who die under torture without giving away the whereabouts of their comrades. There are people who go do bomb disposal work and sit defusing huge device. They know any minute. It does happen. It's always happened. It's common to every known human society. It's a part of every heroic narrative of every known society there's ever been. Those who do it are honored. They are sung, as we say, in the times when there was no literal record. And it doesn't require divine sanction or permission. It is, we're proud to say, if not innate in us, we'd be too humble to say that. It's innate in our species. It's something we can all aspire to.
Yes, you
but
know
we
it.
do not get it from Big Brother. If we did, that would degrade it. It would mean it wasn't heroic. It wasn't brave. It wasn't individual. It wasn't exemplary.
Why are these things
Didn't deserve
good?
anything. Because it would be in the hope either of a reward from Big Brother or for fear of punishment from it. It would abolish morality.
Why?
It destroys ethics.
I was extremely amused when you described faith as a sort of brooking no argument. This university, of course, began with the study of theology. Most of the people here would have been studying theology at the beginning of the university, and indeed the way in which it was taught was not professorial. You didn't have lectures mostly. Mostly you had discussions, debates. People didn't write monographs, they collected discussions, notes of discussions. So the question is, do you really think that your view of faith brooking no argument measures up to really any experience of how people think about their faith? You talked about the evidence that your wife loves you. I think for most religious people, the evidence that there's a God is rather like that.
Well, obviously, I would be mad to suggest that that theologians don't argue. They argue all the time and always have. They fight wars over their arguments. So clearly, they argue. I'd say, when I say brook no argument, I don't mean that they don't argue. When you say that theologians have disputes and interesting discussions, I take it that from your garb, you take a position one way or the other on whether the transubstantiation, whether the bread and wine really is the body and blood of a first century Jew, or is merely symbolic. But what evidence you bring to bear on such an argument, I cannot imagine. It would not be a real argument at all. It would be a false argument. It would not be an argument which could be settled by real evidence.
Just deal with the point about the evidence level when you referred to love of your wife.
When you say that your wife loves you, and you're getting evidence from looks in the eye and catches in the voice was the phrase that I actually used. And the questioner said, that's the way religious people feel about God. Yes, they feel that about God, but there's no evidence that they're getting any cues at all. I mean, their God is an imaginary God inside themselves. They feel that they're getting little looks from the eyes of God and sounds from the voice of God, but why should we believe them since we can't see or hear any evidence to that effect?
Let me ask a question another way. This is my last question. If God does not exist, why do all people have a fixed moral obligation to love and not murder? How do molecules in motion have any authority to tell you how to behave? When you do something wrong, whose standard are you breaking? Who are you displeasing? The carbon atom, the benzene molecule, who?
This question has been asked, Socrates answered it like this, when he was on trial for his life. Accused of blasphemy, by the way. He said that he had an inner daemon, was the way he put it. Not demon, a daemon, a spirit, an inner critic, a conscience would be one way of putting it. And that he knew enough to know, even when he was making the best speech of his life, that if he was making a point that was somehow dishonest or incomplete or shady, the daemon would tell him, yeah, that was clever, but you shouldn't have tried it. He knew. Adam Smith called it the internal witness, who we all have to have a conversation with all the time. It's been C.S. Lewis decided to call it conscience and to attribute it to the divine, but he didn't improve on what Adam Smith said in Theory of Moral Sentiments or what Socrates said when standing trial for his own life. It's been sometimes colloquially defined as, why do people behave well when nobody's looking? I don't believe there's anyone in this hall who doesn't know what I mean by that. Why, when it won't do you any good, will you decide, I could have kept that wallet I found on the back of the cab seat, but I'm not going to. I'm going to turn it in. I'm going to see if find its real possessor. There are people to whom those thoughts do not occur, who are deaf to that idea, who only think of themselves, who wouldn't worry about the internal daemon or censor or companion. And there are, of course, people who only get pleasure from being unpleasant to other people and inflicting cruelty on them. The first group we call the sociopathic, and the second group we call the psychopathic. And they occur in nature and in society. My only problem is with those who think that they're all made in the image of God. The one explanation that absolutely doesn't work at all, that gets you nowhere.
How do you feel about religion influencing politics and public life?
People should be free to speak their minds. I mean, I'm a great believer in free speech, and so members of Parliament should speak their minds, and if their minds are influenced by their religion, then that's fine. What I would object to, I think, is the view that somehow religion has a privileged right to speak because it's religion. And I think you probably agree with that as well. If you stand up in Parliament and make an excellent speech in favour of something which religion has a view on, like abortion, say, if you make your points well and win the vote by making your points well, that's fine. But what you shouldn't be allowed to get away with is saying, because it's religion, therefore, this is what we should do.
Now, the other question, the question that I described, the sort of secularism, humanism question, we've had a good deal of debate about secularism, and it's quite right, absolutely right, that the major issue today is trying to diminish the presence of religion in the public square, on policy decisions, and in education. This is a priority. And yet the tendencies at the moment are in the opposite direction. In my own country, in the UK, the government in the last 10, 15 years has been giving more and more tax money to faith-based schooling. This they've done, on the basis of the wonderful experiment in faith-based schooling, which is called Northern Ireland, and they seem to have learned absolutely nothing from that. And in many different ways, including medical research and medical services, the negative influence of the over-amplified religious voice in the public square is a serious problem, and it does have to be diminished.
From my point of view, it's impossible to ignore the influence of Islam. I mean, Islam is its own ideology and set of dogmatisms that are inflexible and at odds with the spirit of science fundamentally. And despite the fact that there was a brief period where there seemed to be some, happy convergence between scientific and mathematical insight and Islam, for the most part, Islam has been hostile to, a real intellectual life, and in a way that Christianity was hostile even when the scientific worldview was struggling to be born in the 16th century and the 15th century. What we have historically is a real war of ideas, and it can be crystallized in the moment where Galileo was shown the instruments of torture and put under house arrest by people who refused to look through his telescope. Right? I mean, so that was the genius of religion paired with the emerging genius of science.
If Christianity is true, then why aren't the differences that Jesus makes in the lives of Christians more powerful or evident than the impact other religions make on their adherents?
I don't know if I accept the premise of the question.
Well, the questioner adds, Gandhi was every bit as influential as any Christian.
Yeah, that's true, and that's one of the problems with Christianity. The biggest problem with Christianity is Christians. I admit it.
But the questioner is asking a more central question, which is, if this is the truth,
yes,
why then doesn't that truth, by the weight of its infinite being, cause its adherents to behave in a way that we can all notice?
Well, I think you can notice it in several Christians. I think Christians for years have been the ones that have built hospitals and cared for the poor and cared for the weak and the sick. So I think it does make a difference. My problem, which is part of the problem that the questioner is asking, is why doesn't it have this effect on everyone? And I'll throw a little Christian theology in here. The problem isn't that we don't have all the Holy Spirit. We do. We just don't allow all the Holy Spirit to do what it should do. It's our problem. We are fallen human beings. And that's why Christ had to come, because we are fallen human beings.
And has to come again because he didn't get it right the first time. I agree with you that the grammar of the question is wrong, but for a different reason. I don't see what's moral about Christian preaching. For example, apart from the horrible idea of vicarious redemption, I'll say again, in case I missed you the first time, what I mean by that. I could pay your debt, even if I didn't know you. If I was a friend, I could say, you're in debt, I'll pay it. In extreme cases, people have been known to say, I'll serve your sentence in prison. I could do that for you. What I cannot do is relieve you of your responsibility. I can't say, throw your sins on me, they'll melt away. Immoral. People are not allowed to be, they're not entitled to be relieved of their responsibilities. And the vicarious redemption by human sacrifice is a very primitive and horrible scapegoating idea that belongs to the barbaric period of human history.
So all pardons are immoral?
No, not all pardons. No, I didn't say that. I said vicarious redemption is an immoral doctrine. It's also immoral of the Nazarene to say, take no thought for the morrow, not to clothe, not to eat, not to invest, leave your family, leave your children, leave everything, give up the world, no investment, no thrift, no thought for the future, just follow me. That's only moral if you are a sure believer in the idea that the world is about to come to an end, which prophecy is that the world is coming to an end real soon. There's no point in caring about anything else. That's not a moral preaching to me at all. And of course, it's completely laughable to say Christians build hospitals. Just many Christians have bombed hospitals as have built them, and as many Muslims have built hospitals as Christians have, and as many Babylonians have built great buildings as Christians have. If that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do.
I think there is a big barrier to getting across rationalist, atheist, free-thinking arguments against religion. And it's the fact that religious people generally think that they and their religion are doing good things for good reasons, even when they're actually doing horrible things. For instance, oppressing women and homosexuals, spreading lies about contraception, hindering scientific progress, etc. So how can we even hope to get across to them the damage that their views cause when they think they're actually being good and being motivated by good reasons, and that we're the ones who are wrong? So it's a good question. It points to the fact that most people, most of the time, are actually motivated to be good. I mean, it's not there are a lot of evil mustache twirling people who think that they're consciously aware that they're being evil and just wanting to harm people. As Steven Weinberg, the physicist, pointed out, good people, without religion, good people will still be good, bad people will still be bad, but to get good people to do bad things, that often requires religion. So what to do about this? I think really there really are only two things we can do. We have to undermine the truth claims of religion. We have to call into question the beliefs that motivate good people to do harmful things. So, if the belief that homosexuality is an abomination destined to be punished by a wrathful God who finds it loathsome. Many, many millions of people believe this. They believe this because of their religious doctrines. They weren't born into this world believing it. This is an ideology that gets drummed into them early in life. If our religions were different, this belief would go away. If there were a line in the Bible which said, if all the homophobic passages of the Bible were removed and they were replaced by lines which said, well, men can love men and women can love women, we wouldn't have a problem with homophobia. So this is an ideology, and what it creates is this, just look at the results in our society. At the level of individuals, we have people by the millions who suffer total isolation in their communities, who are convinced that their parents and their friends will cease to love them if they knew they were gay. And even more horribly, they're right about that in many cases. And I hear from these people by the thousands in emails. So these are not parents who are disposed to hate their children. These are parents who have an ideology that causes them to hate their children in many cases, or to fear that their children are going to hell. So this destroys relationships, and then it also subverts our political discourse in ways that should otherwise be unthinkable. The fact that we have to argue about gay marriage and not talk about poverty or nuclear proliferation or climate change or anything else of great consequence. So we have to undermine the beliefs, and we also have to talk about the consequences of the needless complication that is occasioned by the beliefs. So that's really the two things I think that need to be focused on in order to undercut this.
Well, this arrogation of power in the material world is really nothing compared to the dictatorship that is suggested by those who infer the whole celestial design that backs it. That's why I want to spend a moment or two telling you why I'm an anti-theist. You may be an atheist and wish that there was a God who loved you and took care of you. It's possible, but just to decide there isn't enough evidence for it. Just as Mr. Jefferson was a deist, but didn't believe in religion. He didn't think God intervened. These positions are equally compatible. I know several atheists who would happily say that they wish it were true, but that they can't find that it is believable. My own view is that it's very fortunate for us that it isn't true, and I shall say why. If there was a supervising creator who took a personal interest in your life, what you would have from the moment of your conception, at least in one interpretation, would be a permanent, inescapable, unchangeable, unalterable, unchallengeable rule, which would involve round-the-clock surveillance and supervision of every single waking and sleeping moment of your life. The abolition of any privacy in your life or even in your mind and your most private thoughts. The most complete form of totalitarianism ever imagined. And indecent, too, when you think of how many private moments would have to be supervised in this way and invigilated permanently. And that would go on not just for the rest of your life, as it would if you lived in Iran. It would go on after you died. In fact, after you died, the real invigilation would begin. They'd only have started with you at the moment when you left this vale of tears. The two offers are, at that point, as you will know, at least from two of the leading monotheisms, either an eternity of praise and servility, everlasting praise and adoration of someone who has only done his job by creating you, hasn't been invited to do so, proposition that sounded more like hell to me when I first heard about it, or a very much more unpleasant one, derived not from the Old Testament but from the New. There's no hell in the Old Testament. There's genocide, there's racism, there's slavery, there's child mutilation, there's everything else you could wish for, but there's no punishment of the dead. Not until the arrival of the gentle Nazarene is it suggested that for a crime you probably were forced to commit, because after all, you're created a sinner. You're created sick and commanded to be well, the essence of the totalitarian principle. But for that, you might face an eternity of torture, to which there will be no end. Now, I think this is a horrible proposition. I think those who wish for it are wishing for slavery and servility, for the abdication of their own responsibility, for the dissolution of their minds, the abolition of their individuality. I'm therefore very glad to say that there is no evidence for it at all. We can relax. And one way of demonstrating beyond very much doubt that it is man-made is its proliferation. We have, I think, two choices here. Either man-made God or God made man. If it's the former, nothing much remains to be explained. If it's God made man, it's very hard to see why there are so many religions and why they're constantly at war with one another. Make the opposite assumption that man has invented religion and God, nothing is left to be explained. There is no mystery. There are, of course, innumerable proliferating cults, sects, confessional discrepancies, warring churches, schismatic groups. Most of the violence in Iraq, as we know, is not directed at our own brave soldiers and their allies among Iraqis, but at other Iraqis by other Muslims, who think it's cultural to blow up each other's mosques, something a secularist would never agree to do, to blow up, say, the Golden Dome at Samarra. We know from pre-monotheistic times, we know from Sophocles and Antigone, that any person of ordinary morality has a natural resistance to desecration, to profanity. We wouldn't do that. We'll leave it to the religious to do it, which you always can. The last time American troops were needed in a context like this, it was because the Christians of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia were tearing each other's throats out, burning each other's churches, killing each other's children, all of it with a divine warrant, all of them, every last one of them, a faith-based. On that occasion, the Muslims were the most civilized people in the case. It doesn't make any difference. Almost everybody gets, as it were, their turn at bat to be the most intolerant among religious. But to say that this is man-made, it seems to me to say something that's almost obvious.
The churches, until very recently, have taken a monopoly of birth, marriage, and death. And these great moments of transition, these rites of passage in our lives, which seem to demand of us that we do something special to mark them. And as you know, organized humanist societies with a capital H now do things like humanist marriages and humanist funerals. But in the general public, there is a kind of anxiety about wicker caskets and open-toed sandals and beards and things, and they're just quite the same thing. It doesn't have the bells and smells of a church, which seems to be more appropriate when you've lost somebody very dear to you. And so the humanist thing seems to be a slightly poor substitute for it in the minds of some people. In fact, it isn't at all, and some of these ceremonies can be very uplifting. But it is true that people need ceremonies, and they do need rites of passage. And I'm minded of some examples given in literature of the choices that people make themselves to mark something very important, like a birth, welcoming a child into the family, into the community, or people deciding to live together, pooling their resources and building a life together, raising children together, or what we do when somebody we care about dies. And lots of different imaginative things that we do, which we've been stopped from thinking about and making up, because there is this convention, there is this tradition of baptism and the marriage ceremony in church and the church funeral. You don't need a humanist ceremony, you just need you. You just need you in some imagination. You just need you in the recovery of the sense that we're each of us perfectly capable of finding ways of marking these great moments of transition in lives, and indeed of refreshing ourselves every day or every week, as it might be, in more satisfying and more honest, and this I think is the fundamental point, much more honest ways than are offered by the religions when they address these needs in our society.
Now, it's true that there are religious people, and now even the Pope, who have relaxed their adherence to tradition enough to make room for something like evolution, right? But it is still a problem.
Not a super new idea. I mean, right? Aquinas was talking about this in the 13th century and 14th century. The idea that that if it was in science and it was contradicted by the book, then you're misreading the book, right? I mean, that's a pretty old idea.
Yeah, but that is to subvert science rather than the book in Aquinas' case. I mean, Aquinas thought heretics should be put to death, right? His argument for capital punishment for heresy. And Augustine made the same argument. Augustine thought they should be tortured, right? So that those two great lights of the Catholic Church gave us the Inquisition.
If you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely? That the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake. And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all, but yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I can say, I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
The second of the 2 questions you asked was, how is it that human beings can be such an alloy, that we can be full of kindness and tenderness to other people, but also have this capacity for cruelty and for unkindness and for treating the other as something less than ourselves. And alas, this is a fact about us. Obviously, history thrills horribly with examples of the inhumanity of human beings to one another, no question about it. And when we talk about humanism, and we talk about trying to base our ethics on our best understanding of human nature, that understanding has to include this fact about us. It's a very troubling fact, because if you think about Nazism in Germany in the 30s and 40s, and what very many ordinary Germans did to their fellow human beings, and you ask yourself, what does this mean? Does it mean that there is a streak of malice or evil in that people? No, is the answer. Does that mean that all of us are capable of this? And alas, yes, is the answer. Circumstances can make us behave in ways that are, deeply, deeply wrong. So the task that we face is in the education of sensibilities, really. We do this to ourselves in our schooling, of course, but much, much more richly we do it through our literature, through our arts, through our reflection, through our encounter with one another, of trying to promote mutual understanding and tolerance. And I often point out that we all think we're very tolerant. It's because we don't really mind. But when we do mind, then that's when the work of tolerance begins, if we recognize the right of other people to think and act differently from ourselves, subject, of course, to the harm principle. But it's a work to be done. It's a job of work, trying to diminish the harm that we're all capable of doing and enhancing the good. And the good news is that although our newspapers are full of terrible news about atrocities and disasters and conflicts and punishments and hangings and the rest, every day in every human community all around the world, there are tens of thousands of acts of kindness. And I can't help feeling that, on the whole, the very evidence of human societies and human cities and the rest is evidence far more of cooperation than of conflict, far more of the bonds that human beings feel for one another than of oppositions. There's one little example that one can use in this connection. If you were walking down a street behind somebody and that person was underneath a teetering pile of bricks just about to fall on their head, what would you do? You wouldn't stand back and say, this is going to be interesting, or get your camera out in the hope of getting a nice shot of them. You would spontaneously and instinctively shout out, call out to them, look out. And it wouldn't matter who that person was, what religion they were, what gender, what anything, but you would call out instinctively to a fellow human being in such a situation, and that is a very positive and hopeful sign about ourselves. And that's the one, of course, that we have to work to enhance. Now, the second... Shall I just finish with the second? The second question that our friend from Iran asked, and I read it out to you, he said, we know religion and politics are married. This is an international problem. In the Middle East, the system is dogmatic and hypocritical in the name of God. How can we solve this? It might be that the question says, is dogmatic and hypocritical in the name of God? How can we solve this? I'm not sure where the emphasis should lie. But I think it ought to be the first one. Well, this adverts to a theme which has recurred and recurred all throughout our discussion so far this weekend, and it really is very essential, because the primary task is to reduce the footprint of religions in our public square. I've said elsewhere, and I really hold to this view, that in a liberal society, even though, in an open, liberal, pluralistic society, even though the great paradox of such societies is that we find ourselves tolerating the intolerant, and they rise up in our midst and then they threaten our tolerance and our openness. One of the most tragic modern examples is the Netherlands. The Dutch people are the warmest-hearted, most open-armed, most welcoming people in the world, rational, tolerant, and they welcomed in lots of immigrants, and one result has been a serious threat to the stability of their society. As a result, it's a tragic thing, and it is a difficulty. But what we have to do is to say, of course, people are entitled to believe what they like. If you believe that there are fairies at the bottom of your garden, and just so long as it doesn't bother anybody else, believe what you like. And moreover, all groups and all individuals, of course, are entitled to be part of the conversation and to have their say. We tend to listen to them more when they have some competence. It's not clear that that's always the case, even with the churches in our society, but when it's something on which they have an interest or a claim, let's hear them. But the trouble, of course, is that the religions have a vastly overinflated presence in our society for historical and other reasons, and that is now the real target. We've got to diminish the size of the religious presence. We've got to turn their volume down a little bit, and we've got to persuade them to recognize at last that they are self-selected interest groups on a par with all others in society, and they're not entitled any more than any of the others are to our tax money or to an amplifier or to a special place in society.
And I give publicity and exposure whenever I can to those who were brave enough in old times to oppose this nightmarish belief. And one of the great opponents of the Islamic totalitarianism in ancient Persia was the great Omar Khayyam, perhaps the greatest poet of old Persia, whose Rubaiyat, I'm sure, is known at least to some of you. And my favorite verse of this comes from the Robert Le Gallienne translation, and it takes the form of a question. The quatrain is in the form of a question. It says, "And do you think that unto such as you, a maggot-minded, starved, fanatic crew, God gave a secret and denied it me? Well, well, what matters it? Believe that too." To this magnificent astronomer and scientist and physician and humanist of Persia, who opposed the cruel, sadistic, verminous, ignorant mullahs of his day, I borrow the question, what is your authority for saying that you know something that I don't?
Christopher, I'm giving a probability argument. As you said before, you can't disprove the existence of God. And you can't prove beyond any doubt that there's a God. I'm giving probability. I'm giving cosmological, teleological, moral, consciousness, reason, mathematics, all of those things I listed before. It's open. The evidence is open to everybody. And this is related to your 70,000 years point that you just made there. From a Christian perspective, God has always had a revelation, even before Christ. It talks about the fact that God has always had a witness. There's three witnesses. There's creation. Everyone has creation. There's conscience. Everyone has conscience. And there's Christ. Now, Christ, true, only came 2,000 years ago. But his sacrifice of atonement, his sacrifice of atonement is retroactive to everybody that lived before him. So he's always had a witness. It is quite convenient, and that is the very nature of God. You're absolutely correct.
Well, I got him to say it. You see, if we were only discussing ontological questions, that would be all very well, and it could be quite amusing. I could say that you require a higher degree of standard of proof for your proposition than I perhaps do for mine, and you'd probably accept that, and so forth, and we could go back and forth. But we'd be paltering again with the essence of the matter, which is this. The difference between the theist and the deist is as follows. The deist says, may not make sense without some kind of designer. The theist says, when I tell you what to do, Christopher, I have God on my side. The deist says, he can tell what God wants of me, what length I should shave off the end of my penis, if I'm a boy or have a male child, or off the clitoris if it's a female child. He knows to the exactitude what the proportions of that should be, what the diet should be, what the dietary laws ought to be, who I should sleep with, and in what position. And various other things. And since God doesn't ever directly appear and say, do it this way, it's done for him, and this is really convenient, by human representatives who claim to act in his name. So that's why I think your standard of proof should be a great deal higher, because if the reason this point is important to you is because it would mean real power in the only world that actually exists, which is the material world, of you over me. And you wonder why I'm not keen.
John Stuart Mill stated in his great essay on liberty that the one central rule here in thinking about the plurality of interests and desires is that the pursuit of them by us should never harm other people in their pursuit of what they want to do and what they see as their good. And under the government of this principle, the harm principle, Mill wanted to see as wide a range of human experiments as possible. And this indeed is a directly Enlightenment insight into the possibility of human flourishing. Once individuals have been liberated from the prison houses of orthodoxy, the hegemony over the mind of religious teachings, and the possession of the human individual by an absolute monarch.
If the Almighty God appears suddenly on the cloud or on the earth or part of the universe, what is your reaction? Are you going to believe, or are you going to go against him?
What would it take for you to believe in God, not just miracles?
Yeah, I mean,
popping his head through the clouds.
Yeah, that's the thing I've worried about a lot. Obviously,
it would do wonders for the book.
the reason I worry about it is that obviously, as a scientist, I'm committed to the view that I would change my mind if evidence came along.
After doing this for several years now, one of the best arguments against atheism that I've ever come across is back then when my pastor told me that we humans cannot even begin to comprehend the desires of God or what even lies ahead after our death. Is exactly how he put it, and I hope you'll stick with me to the end. So he asked me, hey Nash, do you remember when you were a child? And I said, yeah, after which he goes, back then when your mom barred you from going to that party that you've been looking forward to simply because she did not want you to, or when she barred you from spending time with that friend that you usually enjoyed spending time with, how did that make you feel? That was the first question he asked me. Obviously my reply was, I felt terrible, and in most of these instances I would usually be mad at her beyond measure for days on end, at which point the preacher makes a final point and asks me, now that you're grown up looking back to those moments, do you think your mom overreacted in the decisions she made while you were growing up? Do you think that she did everything she did, even things that pissed you off, with your best interest at heart, or was she doing it for selfish reasons? I immediately go, yes, of course, because I genuinely believe that if she hadn't led me down the path that she did, I'm 100% confident that I would not be in the position that I am today in life. So I'll always be grateful to her. Anyway, this must have been the response the preacher was hoping for, because he immediately claims that our relationship as humans with God is the exact same way. That we are so inferior and childlike compared to the intentions that God has for our lives and futures that we cannot even begin to comprehend them. And all that I was doing by questioning God for all the unfortunate things going on around the world that he doesn't stop was equivalent to that child version of myself being mad at my mom because I did not know she was punishing me for my own good. This preacher even went on to explain that when innocent people suffer unimaginable things here on earth, or children lose their lives because of these freaky diseases and accidents, I should refrain from using that as an argument against God, because none of us know the beauty of what happens after we pass on or what goes on in the afterlife. And perhaps those that go through these horrible situations are the lucky ones in the end. And guys, I'll be honest, when he made these arguments, I was actually left speechless for several minutes after that, and I even remember asking him to give me several minutes to ponder about everything he just said before I can either concede to his argument or formulate an argument of my own to rebut what he just said. I had just started my deconstruction process at the time, so I wasn't really mentally equipped to refute most religious arguments on the spots. After several minutes of us talking about other unrelated issues, however, I was back with what I believe to this day was a reasonable rebuttal. First, I said to the preacher that while it is true that my parents did whatever they did with my best interest at heart, including the things I vehemently disliked as a child, I still think they were wrong to adopt the stance that we don't want you to do this because we said so and you will understand when you're a grown-up. We all agree today that that kind of approach when it comes to dealing with your kids is tantamount to manipulation, man. Even as a child, I still deserved a rational justification accompanying every disappointing order or decision from my parents. You don't want me being friends with so-and-so anymore. Okay, that's cool, man. But at least tell me why, because I've never seen him do anything mischievous. And if you have any information that I might not be privy to, then please let's go ahead and have a discussion about it, ma'am or dad. Handling issues in this way, even if I'd still be unhappy afterwards, would not only let me know that my opinions are valued, it would have also equipped me with the necessary life skills and information that would have come in handy once I started navigating life on my own. Hey, ma'am, you don't think I should attend a party at my young age? Please explain all the possible dangers to me. I'll probably still hate your decision to bar me at the end, but you can rest assured that I'm wiser now because you've laid all these facts about the world on me. And I know that I might not appreciate things for today, but you can rest assured that I will someday. Anyway, guys, my reason for making this first point was to dive into how manipulative it is for religious people to expect everyone else to just sit back and assume that God is working in mysterious ways. Why does one guy get a better paying job but another loses his, even though the second one is down with a family relying on him? A Christian apologist will tell you that the first one is experiencing God's glory, but the second one should just be patient as God works his mysterious magic. And why does Enrique Sija get to live until 100 years old, but some children suffer excruciating diseases and die at young ages, man? They'll give you the same response. After all, the Bible does say that long life is the reward and blessing that we receive for honoring our parents. Like, that's the only earthly and unmysterious promise that we've been given throughout the whole Bible, I believe. Now, bear in mind that atheists and agnostics do not wonder about these things in and of themselves. We know genetics are weird like that, and evil people like Kissinger living to old ages can be due to a multitude of factors, from access to better, expensive healthcare to just living and having access to safer, healthier environments away from poisonous industries, man. It's the religious people who come along and tell us that actually, no, this one living to 100 years is due to the will of God or some mysterious divine power, and so is the case for the millions of children that just lost their lives. But we do not get the privilege of asking them, why is that? Because the Creator works in a mysterious way, and we just have to trusting. I promise you guys that if anyone made such a claim in any other context, we'd be a step closer to throwing them into an asylum. Anyway, all this brought me to the next point that I made to my pastor at the time. The argument he had just made had a lot of issues in and of itself, even if we chose to believe it as the truth, as we've just proven. But when we think about everything religion and its so-called leaders tend to claim, we realize that the pastor's argument cannot even be possibly true. Throughout history, religious people and religious leaders have claimed to understand the mind and desires of God, and in fact millions of people, including those like William Tyndale, had to pay with their own lives for challenging the doctrines laid out by these church leaders, only for the church leaders several years later or decades down the line to go, oopsies, we were wrong. It's okay to translate the Bible, evolution is actually okay, etc, etc, man. They get the advantage of changing their minds whenever they want about whatever scientific innovation has been made and still get to claim it as a glory of their own God, man. So why should we think religious leaders today bear any divine authority when they say that abortion, same-sex marriage, masturbation, fornication, or even swearing is wrong according to the divine leader? What makes them so much better than their predecessors, man? And just to make it clear, their predecessors also relied on the texts laid out in the Bible. Even more importantly, the Bible claims that books written by the likes of Paul are 100% inspired by the God of Abraham, just like all the other books, but the difference this time is these books are in the New Testament. So religious people don't care to claim that, Jesus came and ushered in the new and the old that was in the New Testament, or that was in the Old Testament was done away with. But we still find that these books in the New Testament condone and encourage some of the most harmful and nonsensical social standards to ever exist, man, including but not limited to slavery. So your God on one hand makes it clear in the same book that me hooking up with someone I'm not yet married to is a serious sin, but he doesn't think owning another person like mere property is a sin. Go ahead and explain that to me, man. And when I question that, apparently I'm still not intellectually aware enough to see the mysteriousness in the hypocrisy. Fuck out of here, man. Anyway, guys, that's the story I thought I'd share with you today, guys. What do you think about the video and the arguments laid out throughout it? Do you have your own that you'd like to share? Please do, man, in the comment section. There is one of my most favorite things to engage with in the comment section. So, I look forward to reading everything that you thought about the video. Thanks a lot, guys, for sticking with me to the end, and in the meantime, I love you, and I'll see you again the day after tomorrow, man. Peace.